Hi, this is Suraj Gopal, the VCS for Science for Students with Disabilities supports, and I'm coming to you with an Earth Science lesson, the beginning of Unit 4, which is on landscapes and specifically focuses on weathering and rock formations. As you can see from the lesson, you watch multiple videos about freeze and thaw action, about physical weathering in many forms, about chemical weathering in many forms. Then it's followed by independent work where you identify the type of weathering occurring in various scenarios, as you can see, and finally do a few Regents problems. And you'll note also, and this is specific for my area of support, that they are reading a text from New Visions. This particular text on physical and chemical weathering broken down. So my plan of attack, like it was in a video that I made last week for Living Environment, is to make accompanying notes very often. If it feels like there's a good structure in the lesson, there are great structures to all of these lessons I'm finding in the science section, but nonetheless, I find it so important, especially in remote circumstances, to help students with disabilities take very good notes. So that's a combination of me modeling what good notes look like and then also prompting them to answer certain questions that I think would be valuable for them when they cycle back and study for assessments. So if you look here, I think it was especially important for me in this case to have example pictures so that they could be associating the terms with specific types of rock contour, I guess you could say. And so we just have weathering proper here. This is most likely physical weathering, this picture that I'm clicking right now. And down here, you can see this is probably physical weathering. We don't know enough to really say for sure. This one I did look up and it was chemical weathering. And I noted here that chemical weathering occurred because we can tell it occurred just from looking at the scenario because of the changing color of the rock formations, which is indicative of a change in chemical composition. I did note, however, that this is not always the case, and a point that teachers want to make, this is a teacher-facing video, a point that you want to make to your students is that color can change very often when water interacts in a purely physical weathering scenario. That is, water can stain a rock formation, thereby changing the color without actually changing the chemical composition. So this is not a dead ringer for chemical weathering, but very often in more pronounced situations like the one above in this picture, we can tell that chemical weathering is going on based on the change in color. I always leave space for students to record any questions they might have for their teachers. This, I think, just helps you do your job, helps us all do our job a lot better because so much of our job needs to be reactive to specific areas of concern for students. And the more you teach these lessons, the more you might be able to predict those concerns. Now, I thought it important to write out questions that accompany the New Visions text. So the New Visions text is on the side when you're doing the independent work or when a student's doing the independent work below here that I've put in the table. But it's important for me to get them thinking about larger themes here. So what are the important differences between weathering due to water versus the other ones? We know that water is very specifically tackled in the New Visions text, whereas there are greater similarities between weathering by temperature, weathering by wind, weathering by rain, or weathering by waves. Those are all other ones that just kind of slowly chip away at a structure. The water is specifically different because of the freezing, thawing action in cracks and rocks. Then the second question, to just, again, drive their thinking, help them recognize themes and patterns, which are so important all over science. What are the similarities in all of the chemical weathering processes described? What substance comes up each time? Why does this substance appear in each scenario? The substance of concern, I think, would be acid, usually in the form of acid rain. So there are various processes, usually with the interaction of atmospheric gases that are going to produce acids in various scenarios that then make their way onto a rock formation and cause chemical weathering. As long as students recognize that, they are primed, if you will, for the independent work. And then I try to prime further by having them have these two questions in the backs of their heads while they are looking at the various pictures in the independent work section. So again, this independent work section asks them to analyze photographs and then decide whether they're seeing physical or chemical weathering and why. And so the first question you would want to ask yourself is, what's the substance that's causing the weathering to occur? All right. Could be a substance, could be some other life form, but not necessarily. Sometimes it's due to an aspect of nature. Is there a chemical change to the rock formation that is weathering? So we can see in certain scenarios that there's an obvious chemical change. Otherwise, answering number 1 will be your route into answering number 2. And once they have these two questions in the backs of their heads, they're properly reacting to evidence in the photograph. So when they look at the chain, hopefully they will see the rust. When they look at the sneaker, hopefully they will infer that the weathering away of the sole of the shoe is due to walking and the pressure provided by the feet, and so on and so forth. Finally, again, like I did in the living environment lesson that I created supports for, I have a few important vocabulary words. This is a big problem. This is something that I'm going to keep doing when it comes to supporting science for students with disabilities. Many lessons, and it's such a difficult challenge because I think our science curriculum creators and any teacher who is tackling any science course realizes that there's a plethora of vocabulary in the question that is often not directly tackled in the lesson, because there's just so much to get through in the lesson. If you look through this lesson, there's plenty going on in the first place. There are multiple videos that go into detail about things, and parts of these, you could say that maybe these two vocabulary words were tackled in a previous lesson. Groundwater is often part of the water cycle, as is runoff. So perhaps students saw it there again. However, I do like to create a bank specific to whichever questions that they're tackling so that they get used to the language. They also get used to the process of breaking down a question. So in addition to the problem annotation that I've given here, well, let me actually describe the problem annotation first. This is just an important process that I always have students undergo if they are stuck. Sort of the toughest piece of feedback to react to is just, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so often students engaging in this process, it gives us something to do, it increases their confidence, but it's not a mindless act. By doing this, they have to interact with the language, they have to find science vocabulary, they have to compare information in, I guess, the description to the actual question being asked and decide if that's relevant information. Often on the Regents, they get irrelevant information along with relevant information. So this is not a mindless process, but I do think it increases the confidence because it eliminates, hopefully, that period where students have no idea what to do. And so in addition to problem annotation, students have support vocabulary, and I would say that hopefully these 4 steps lead them not only to be able to answer questions better, but to reframe questions in their own language. Sometimes I will, in addition to having them do this process, at the end of it I'll say, hey, can you tell me this question? Can you tell me what this question is asking you in your own language? And just by kind of activating that, they get a lot better at developing facility with the vocabulary and concepts that they're learning in the class. So this is the support for Unit 4, Day 1. Moving forward, I will probably create more supports for the Unit 4 before moving on into other earth science topics. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful.